What's up, everybody? It's Luke, Cool Hand Electric. Hey, have you ever wanted to nerd out on arc fault and ground fault protection before? If so, stick around. Hey, everybody. It's Luke. I got my assistant, Adrian, over here working with me. We're going to talk a bit about arc fault protection and ground fault protection. What it is, why you want it, why it's important, those type of things. So, most people are familiar with these little plugs. This is a certain brand here, but they have basically the test and reset buttons in the middle. They've been around for a while. Late 70s is actually when they were started, and then codes keep on adding them now. If you have a house that doesn't have GFCI protection in the wet areas, your kitchens, your bathrooms, your exterior, your garages, you're not going to be able to sell the house without having those put in. It's just a basic thing. Now, GFCI protection is accurate for about 10 years, okay? There's ways of testing this to see how quickly it trips. Okay, there's a certain amount of milliamps that is given to it, and then in a certain amount of milliseconds, it's supposed to kick off. All that does is protect you from getting shocked. So that's something that you want to test. If it's 10, 15 years old, it's probably going to be a slow trip and needs to be swapped out. So that's something that we change out quite often. The manufacturers don't warranty them very long at all, just because it's an electrical device. It's got mechanical parts inside of it. The more it's used, the more it gets worn out. It's going to go out over time. So that's with GFCIs. Now, arc faults is a little bit newer thing. They started off installing them just in bedroom circuits, okay? And that was the code. So if you had a house that was wired or built in the early 90s into probably 2005-ish or so, most cities would have, you'd maybe see 3 or 4 of these type of breakers. This is a big breaker, but on the cover, it would be a breaker that has a little push button on it, okay? That one was called an arc fault circuit interrupter, or AFCI. If you see that on an inspection report, that's what it's talking about, AFCI. Well, what's an arc? Okay, so if you're familiar with welding, you see a spark in between something, okay, that's an arc. What this would do is you would have your one part of the circuit, your hot, the regular breakers would just protect the hot, and then you would also have the neutral on the other end, and it would go through here, inside of there, and it's going to measure, and if there's any spike in change in amperage at all, any type of change in the voltage as well, it's got little monitors, and it would sense a change and it would kick off. And the idea was it will protect fires. If there was staples and things going in on the wire that was arcing in between it, if there was a chance of it arcing and getting hot, it would be kicking off. That's the theory behind it. Downside sometimes though is, new technology, you have a lot more electronics in these than you do on the standard type of breaker. The electronics inside of here are going to be more vulnerable to surges. Spikes just like your computer or your flat screens or any type of electronics has a lot more sensitive to voltage fluctuation. So on top of that, especially in Texas, I don't know if colder states are that way, but in Texas, most of the time the breaker panels are outside or in the garage, and then they're going to be stacked on top of each other. So the breaker box is already not in an air-conditioned space. And then the breakers are going to be stacked on top of each other. And these circuit breakers run hotter than your other circuit breakers. So they will get hot inside of here in the electronics, just like your computer, the old school, the big computers would have like a cooling fan. Even your laptops, you're not supposed to have them, down smashed in blankets and stuff while you're working on it. You want to give it some air circulation, and that just cools off the electronics. Very similar with these. They're stacked together, they get hot, and they go out sooner than the circuit breakers used to be. And when you test these, we have ways of testing how quickly it can trip, and the timing over time will be a slower trip, and sometimes even have a nuisance trip. It'll trip on new appliances and whatnot. So it's a growing technology. It's getting better. It's getting safer, but there are some complications with them. A lot of electricians try to avoid even talking about them because the warranties and the callbacks can be quite frustrating, and a customer can get frustrated with it. And when you upgrade an old house that wasn't wired for arc faults, there's a whole nother bag of worms, I guess is what they would say. People would wire things on your three-ways, especially in older houses, that just does not comply with arc faults. So sometimes you got to run new wiring, or it's like, hey, this is not compatible with arc faults. We try it out, and then we have to take some of them off and put them on standard breakers, just because older wiring sometimes can't work with it. So a lot of electricians will not want to have that conversation because it can be a headache. It can thin out the hair a bit. I've had a few gray spots from AFCI protection. So that's a little bit about that. Now, the cool thing though is if you have a blue tag on it, you'll see a blue tag. If it's an Eaton brand, Square D has some different colors as well, but those ones are kind of neat. They're arc fault and ground fault. So not only are you getting the protection in the wet areas on that circuit breaker, but you're getting the arc fault protection as well. So that's becoming more and more popular. A lot of people will ask, do I need to have a GFCI if the circuit breaker is ground fault as well? The answer is no, you don't have to. Now, some authorities have in jurisdiction, which is just the term for the local city. In the beginning of our electrical code book, the authority having jurisdiction, they have final say. So if they say, hey, I want you to have these on there anyways, then you got to do it. And then technically it's code because they're authority having jurisdiction. But you could discuss it with them. Most inspectors will have discussions with you as long as you're, not rude, and you can say, hey, I'm GFCI protecting the circuit at the circuit breaker. Why do you want another GFCI as well? And they may have a good reason why they want it, but it's not going to be out of the code book. Okay, it just needs to have GFCI protection, whether it's on the circuit breaker or the outlet. That's the only standard. So, anyways, these will eliminate the need for these GFCIs, which is kind of cool. The downside about that is, if your breaker panel is located in an irritating spot, if it trips off, you don't want to have to go to that irritating spot. It might be easier to have the reset in a location where the wet area is. So it might be a convenience to have the GFCI outlet. So, it kind of depends on your house. It depends on the builder, what their preferences are, and how they bid the job on what you would have. But these are pretty cool. So they have a combination arc fault. Combination means it has series and parallel. So yes, we're gonna get nerdy on this. So a series and a parallel protection. What that means is it will protect an arc in between just the hot wire, which would be considered series, and it will protect an arc between the hot and the neutral, which is a parallel arc. So it'll do a combination of both, series and parallel, and then it'll also protect from ground fault. If there's current going to ground or another part of the circuit, instead of all of it being sent back to the neutral, then it's going to trip off. And all that does is it makes your home safer, makes it protects it from fire. If you have animals like this one here, when we just got her, she loved to chew up cords. So that would have tripped off breakers, as opposed to having little fires, little lamps getting smushed. That can cause arcs, damage of stuff being plugged in. Arcing between these connections can get really hot and it can cause problems. So it's good to have it protected at the circuit breaker. But newer homes, newer technology, it's going to take a little while for, they're just not going to last forever. The circuit breakers are are going to get worn out, and I've especially seen in Texas. At some point, it'd be cool if these circuit breaker boxes could have some air cooling units inside of it, but that causes other complications with fire protection and having everything sealed off. But it would be cool. Industrial cabinets, they have cooling fans inside of them, so I'm wondering if down the road that's going to be something they'll go to just to keep the temperatures down, because these run hot and they go out. I've seen 3-4-year-old arc fault breakers that weren't tripping properly. When you tested it, it would slowly kick off and kick off. You would test the milliamps that it would trip off. It wouldn't trip off within range. So there's definitely a lot of room for improvement when it comes to arc fault protection. But there you go. So we're going to nerd out a bit. There's a little arc fault, ground fault 101. God bless.